is a particular moment many people recognize, even if they have never named it. The body is tired. The room is quiet. The day has ended, and yet the mind has not followed. Thoughts continue to move, one after another, as if something important has been missed and must still be resolved. A memory surfaces, then another. A sentence repeats itself. A question forms, dissolves, and returns, slightly changed. The mind circles the same territory without arriving anywhere new. Overthinking rarely feels active. It feels heavy. The thoughts are not sharp or creative. They are familiar, dull, and persistent. They carry a sense of unfinished business, even when nothing concrete is left to do. In these moments, the mind often believes it is being useful. It tells itself that staying alert is responsible, that letting go would be careless, that rest must be earned through understanding. But the understanding never quite arrives. Instead, the body grows more still while the mind grows louder. Breathing becomes shallow. Time stretches. Each thought seems to require attention, as though ignoring it would lead to some unseen consequence. This experience is not rare. It appears in different forms throughout life, but it often becomes most noticeable at night, when distractions fall away. Without noise or movement, thought turns inward and fills the space. There is a subtle tension in this state, not panic, not fear exactly, something quieter, a low-level unease that keeps the mind scanning, reviewing, anticipating, the feeling that something is unresolved, even when the day itself is complete. What makes overthinking especially exhausting is its circular nature. The same themes return without progress. The mind revisits conversations, decisions, imagined futures. Each pass feels necessary, yet nothing changes. Many people try to escape this state by adding more stimulation, a screen, a sound, a distraction. Others try to force the mind into silence, tightening against the movement of thought. Neither approach brings lasting ease. Overthinking does not come from too much intelligence. It comes from a certain relationship with thought itself, a belief that thought must be followed, that each mental movement deserves engagement. In Buddhist teaching, this experience was noticed long before modern life amplified it. Monks sitting in silence encountered the same restless activity. Without tasks or conversation, the mind revealed its habits clearly. They saw that thought does not stop simply because the body rests. It continues because it has momentum, because it has been trained to move constantly, especially in moments of uncertainty. This is where the exploration begins, not with judgment, not with correction, with recognition. Before any understanding can settle, the experience itself must be seen clearly, not analyzed, not fixed, simply noticed as it is. Right now, notice how thought behaves when nothing is required of you, how it moves on its own, how it repeats, how it promises resolution without delivering it. This noticing does not ask you to change anything. It does not ask you to stop thinking. It only asks you to see what is already happening. From this quiet observation, something important becomes possible. Not immediately, not forcefully, but gently and over time. This is where the Buddhist approach begins. When the mind keeps moving, it is easy to assume something has gone wrong. That rest should bring quiet. That silence should arrive naturally once the day is over. Yet for many people, the opposite happens. The fewer demands there are, the more active thought becomes. This is not a malfunction, it is a habit. In Buddhist understanding, the mind does not move endlessly because it enjoys movement. It moves because it has learned to. Thought has been trained, over time, to stay alert in order to protect. Long before modern life, this pattern already existed. The mind scanned for danger, remembered past mistakes, anticipated future threats. Thinking increased the chance of survival. That training does not turn itself off at night. When the body lies down and the environment becomes still, the mind continues the work it believes is necessary. It reviews, it checks, it replays, it imagines. This activity carries a quiet assumption. If attention is maintained, something bad can be prevented. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable. In silence, the mind loses external reference points. With nothing to respond to, it turns inward. Thought fills the space not because it is needed, but because it is familiar. Buddhist teachers noticed this early on. When monks sat without speaking or moving, thought became more visible, not less. Sitting did not calm the mind immediately. It revealed it. The mind showed its restlessness openly, without disguise. This observation led to an important realization. Thinking continues even when it is no longer useful. The mind does not evaluate whether thought is helping. It simply continues the pattern it knows. Overthinking, from this view, is not excess intelligence. It is excess vigilance. The mind remains on duty, even when there is nothing left to guard. This helps explain why trying to solve overthinking rarely works. The mind interprets effort as confirmation that vigilance is required. More thinking appears justified. The loop strengthens. In Buddhist practice, the question is not how to stop thought, but why thought insists on continuing. What is it protecting? What does it fear will happen if it rests? Often the fear is vague. Not a specific danger, but a general sense of unease. The feeling that letting go would be irresponsible, that something important might be missed. This is why overthinking feels tense rather than curious. The mind is not exploring, it is guarding, it is holding position. Understanding this changes how the problem is approached. The mind is not treated as an enemy. It is seen as overworked, acting out of an outdated sense of responsibility. From here, the path forward does not involve silencing the mind. It involves seeing clearly what the mind is doing and why it believes it must continue. That clarity does not arrive through argument. It arrives through observation. As this understanding deepens, another pattern becomes visible. The mind does not just think continuously. It makes a quiet promise each time it thinks, that the next thought will finally bring relief. That promise shapes the loop. We will stay with that next. When the mind is caught in overthinking, it is rarely aware of what keeps the loop alive. On the surface, it feels like pressure. Beneath that pressure sits a promise, quiet, persistent, and persuasive. The promise is simple. One more thought will do it. One more review of what was said. One more look at what might happen. One more attempt to understand why something felt wrong. The mind believes that resolution sits just ahead, close enough to reach if attention stays sharp. Each thought gestures toward relief without providing it. The promise renews itself automatically. This pattern was noticed early in Buddhist practice. Monks sitting in long periods of stillness observed how the mind leaned forward. Even when nothing changed, thought continued to reach. The reaching mattered more than the content. It created motion where none was needed. Over time, teachers recognized that the relief people expected from thinking did not come from answers. It came from the moment the mind stopped grasping for them. Yet the habit of grasping remained strong. A common image used in early teachings describes thirst, not thirst for water, but thirst for certainty. The mind wants something solid to hold. Thought appears to offer that solidity. Each new idea feels like a step closer to stability, but the step never arrives. Instead, the mind stays active, suspended in anticipation. This anticipation feels purposeful. It disguises itself as responsibility. It suggests that stopping would be careless. At night, this promise becomes especially convincing. The world grows quiet. The body rests. The mind senses openness and fills it with effort. It believes it must stay alert until relief is secured. Many people notice that the content of their thoughts changes very little during these periods. The same themes return. The same concerns appear in slightly altered forms. What keeps the loop alive is not novelty, it is hope. Buddhist teachers pointed out that this hope is subtle. It does not announce itself. It operates beneath awareness. The mind does not say, "This will help." It behaves as if help is imminent. Seeing this changes the experience. The next thought is no longer taken at face value. Its promise becomes visible. The urgency softens slightly. This does not require stopping the thought. It only requires noticing the expectation attached to it. Over time, this noticing reveals something important. Relief does not come from the next thought. It comes from releasing the need for the next one. That release cannot be forced. It happens naturally when the promise loses credibility. In the next part of this exploration, we will step back further and look at why Buddhism turned its attention to the mind so directly, long before modern life intensified these patterns. When Buddhism first emerged, it did not begin with abstract questions about the universe. It began with a very simple observation. Human suffering persisted even when basic needs were met. Food could be available, shelter secure, danger absent, and yet unease remained. This puzzled early observers deeply. The historical context matters here. The world in which these teachings arose was not empty or idle. It was structured, social, ritualized. People worked, raised families, followed traditions, and still, restlessness appeared again and again. The Buddha's attention turned inward, not out of withdrawal, but out of necessity. External conditions alone could not explain inner disturbance. Something else was operating, quietly and consistently. Instead of asking how to arrange the world better, Buddhist inquiry asked how experience itself was being processed. Where did tension actually arise? What transformed neutral moments into distressing ones? This shift was subtle but profound. It redirected attention from events to perception, from circumstance to interpretation, from action to awareness. Early practitioners noticed that the mind rarely stayed with what was present. It moved backward into memory or forward into anticipation. Even during moments of safety, thought carried the residue of past pain and imagined future difficulty. Sitting quietly did not create this movement. It revealed it. This is why stillness became central to Buddhist practice, not because stillness was calming at first, but because it exposed the mechanics of the mind without interference. When nothing demanded attention, thought displayed its habits openly. What became clear over time was that suffering did not require dramatic events. It arose from how the mind related to its own activity. Thoughts were treated as instructions. Images were treated as warnings. Inner commentary was granted authority automatically. Buddhism responded by studying this process carefully. Rather than adding beliefs, it removed assumptions. Rather than offering answers, it examined the questioner. This approach was practical. It did not require withdrawal from life. It required clarity about what was actually happening in experience. Overthinking, from this view, was not a personal failure. It was a universal pattern. By placing the mind at the center, Buddhism offered a different kind of relief. Not relief through control, but relief through understanding. When the mechanics of thought were seen clearly, their grip weakened naturally. This is why Buddhist teachings often feel simple, even repetitive. They return again and again to observation, to noticing, to seeing things as they are, without embellishment. The goal was never to empty the mind. It was to stop being pulled by it. From this foundation, a new way of relating to thought became possible. Thought could be seen as an event rather than a command, as movement rather than truth. That shift marks the next stage of this exploration. One of the most radical shifts in Buddhist teaching is also one of the quietest. It does not ask for belief. It does not require agreement. It invites observation. The shift is this: a thought can be experienced without being obeyed. This may sound ordinary at first. Most people assume they already understand it. Yet, in lived experience, thoughts are rarely treated this way. They are followed instinctively, believed immediately, acted on without pause. Buddhist practice begins by changing this relationship. When early practitioners sat in stillness, they noticed something subtle. Thoughts did not arrive as a continuous stream. They appeared, lingered briefly, and faded. Another thought followed, then another. The mind moved, but not as a solid mass. It moved in fragments. Seeing this required patience. At first, thoughts felt overwhelming. They pulled attention away repeatedly. Over time, a different perception emerged. Thoughts became events within awareness, not the center of it. This distinction matters. An authority demands response. An object can be noticed without action. When a sound occurs, the ear registers it. When a sensation appears, the body feels it. Neither requires interpretation to exist. Thought, in the same way, can be noticed as something that arises and passes. It does not need to be completed. It does not need to be answered. This perspective removes urgency. A thought can be present without requiring engagement. Its appearance alone no longer carries instruction. Buddhist texts often describe this shift indirectly. They speak of watching the mind as one might watch weather. Clouds move. Wind changes. The sky remains. The sky does not interfere with clouds. It does not chase them away. It allows them to pass. When thought is seen this way, overthinking begins to lose its grip. The loop weakens, not because thoughts disappear, but because their authority fades. They still arrive. They simply do not command the same attention. This is where many people misunderstand the practice. They believe the goal is silence. Silence may come later. It is not the starting point. The starting point is seeing thought clearly. Seeing thought clearly changes its texture. A thought that once felt heavy begins to feel lighter. A thought that once demanded resolution begins to feel optional. This does not require effort. Effort tends to reinforce engagement. It requires curiosity. a willingness to observe what is already happening. When the mind notices a thought and does not move toward it, something unexpected occurs. The thought completes itself. It dissolves naturally. No conclusion is needed. This observation carries quiet relief. The mind realizes it does not have to finish everything it starts. From here, the exploration deepens naturally. Once thought is seen as an object, another question arises. Why do some thoughts feel personal while others pass unnoticed? That question opens the next layer of understanding. Some thoughts pass through the mind without leaving a trace. Others linger. They pull attention back again and again, as if they belong more closely to who we are. Overthinking almost always gathers around this second kind. Buddhist practice paid close attention to this difference. When practitioners sat and observed the mind, they noticed that thoughts did not all carry the same weight. Certain thoughts felt charged. They seemed connected to identity, safety, or future well-being. These thoughts did not simply appear. They hooked attention. The reason, Buddhism observed, was not the thought itself. It was attachment. Attachment, in this context, does not mean affection or desire in the usual sense. It means identification. The quiet sense that a thought says something essential about me, about what I am, what I lack, or what might happen to me. A thought about the weather passes easily. A thought about how someone sees you may not. A thought about a sound fades quickly. A thought about a decision you regret may return repeatedly. The difference lies in how closely the thought is tied to self-image. Buddhist texts describe this process carefully. The mind labels certain thoughts as important because they appear to protect identity. They seem to promise control, safety, or coherence. Once a thought carries this promise, it feels personal. This is where overthinking takes root. The mind does not loop because it enjoys repetition. It loops because it believes something about itself is at stake. A mistake, a fear, an unresolved question becomes a reference point for identity. Thought circles it, attempting to secure certainty. When this is seen clearly, something softens. The thought is no longer mysterious. It is no longer interpreted as evidence of a real problem. It is seen as an attempt to stabilize identity. This insight does not remove thoughts instantly. It changes how they are held. A thought can arise without being treated as a verdict. It can be present without being believed. Buddhist teachers often emphasize this gently. They did not encourage rejection of identity. They encouraged looseness. Identity was treated as something that appears in experience, not something that must be defended continuously. When identification loosens, overthinking loses fuel. Thoughts still appear, but fewer of them feel urgent. Fewer feel personal. Fewer demand completion. This is not a practice of detachment from life. It is a practice of seeing how the mind ties itself into knots unnecessarily. As this becomes clearer, another observation follows naturally. Thoughts that feel personal also feel permanent. They seem as if they will stay until resolved. Yet careful observation reveals something else. Thoughts change on their own. We will stay with that next. When a thought feels personal, it often carries another quality with it. It feels fixed, as if it will remain until something is done about it. This sense of permanence gives overthinking its urgency. The mind believes it must act because the thought will not leave on its own. Buddhist observation revealed something different. When practitioners remained still and attentive for long enough, they noticed that even the most persistent thoughts eventually changed. Not because they were answered, not because they were pushed away. They changed because change is their nature. A thought appears. It holds attention. It feels solid. Then, if it is not fed, it weakens. Its edges soften. Another thought may replace it, or a sensation in the body may come forward. Sometimes there is a brief gap, almost unnoticeable, where nothing in particular occupies the mind. This gap is important. Early Buddhist texts often point to this moment indirectly. They speak of observing the arising and passing of mental events, not as a technique, but as a fact of experience. Nothing that appears in the mind remains unchanged. The difficulty is that most people do not stay long enough to see this. The moment a thought arises, engagement follows. Attention feeds it. The thought gains strength. The cycle renews itself. When observation replaces engagement, a different process unfolds. The thought is allowed to complete its natural arc. It reaches its peak and fades. No resolution is required. No insight is necessary. This can feel surprising at first. The mind expects that something must be done. Watching a thought dissolve on its own undermines that expectation quietly. Buddhist teachers sometimes used simple images to point to this. A sound echoes and fades. A ripple spreads across water and disappears. No effort is involved. The process completes itself. Thought behaves the same way when it is not interfered with. This does not mean thoughts stop appearing. It means their lifespan shortens when they are not sustained. Over time, the mind learns something important through direct experience. Thoughts are not problems waiting to be solved. They are events moving through awareness. As this understanding settles, urgency begins to loosen. The mind no longer treats every thought as a task. Some thoughts pass quickly. Others linger briefly. None require completion to end. This realization changes the texture of overthinking. The loop weakens because its foundation erodes. The belief that thinking must continue loses credibility. There is no need to convince the mind of this. It learns through seeing. With this clarity, another layer becomes visible. If thoughts change on their own, then the struggle to control them becomes unnecessary. In fact, that struggle often extends their life. This leads naturally to the next insight. Why effort aimed at stopping thought tends to make overthinking stronger. When overthinking becomes uncomfortable, the most natural response is to try to stop it. The mind tightens. Attention pushes back against the movement of thought. Silence is demanded as an outcome. This reaction is understandable. It comes from fatigue. Yet Buddhist observation noticed a pattern that appears again and again. Effort aimed at stopping thought often gives it more energy. When a thought is treated as a problem, attention locks onto it. The mind monitors whether it is still present. It checks repeatedly. Each check becomes a new moment of engagement. The thought stays alive through the very effort meant to remove it. Early practitioners noticed this clearly during meditation. The more they tried to control the mind, the more restless it became. The struggle itself became the disturbance. This is not because the mind resists authority. It is because attention amplifies what it touches. Whatever the mind pushes against, it highlights. Whatever it tries to eliminate, it keeps in focus. Buddhist teaching responded to this gently. Instead of pushing thought away, practitioners were encouraged to stop interfering, to allow thought to move without participation, to remain present without directing the outcome. This approach can feel counterintuitive. Many people assume that calm requires control. Buddhism suggests something quieter. Calm emerges when interference ends. Consider how the body falls asleep. Sleep does not arrive through effort. Trying to force sleep delays it. The body settles when conditions allow it to settle. The mind works the same way. When effort is released, thought loses friction. It moves more freely, which allows it to complete its natural cycle. The loop weakens because it is no longer reinforced. This does not mean becoming passive. It means shifting from control to observation, from management to presence. Buddhist teachers often use the image of a clenched fist. When the hand tightens, tension appears. When the hand opens, tension dissolves. Nothing is added, something is released. Overthinking follows a similar pattern. When the mind grips thought, it persists. When the grip softens, thought loses momentum. This understanding marks an important turning point. The goal is no longer to stop thinking. The goal is to stop interfering with the mind's natural ability to settle. From here, the practice becomes simpler. Not easier, but simpler. The mind is allowed to do what it already knows how to do when it is not being pushed. This opens the door to a different way of sitting with thought, one where nothing needs to be solved and nothing needs to be completed. We will stay with that stillness next. When effort softens, a different quality of attention becomes available. The mind is no longer occupied with fixing what appears. It begins to rest alongside experience rather than inside it. In early Buddhist practice, this was described simply as sitting. Not sitting with a goal, not sitting to improve the mind, sitting as an act of presence. At first, this can feel unfamiliar. The mind has been trained to move toward problems. When it is not given something to solve, it may search for one. Thoughts arise. The impulse to engage follows. Over time, something else becomes noticeable. Thoughts appear, and attention does not move toward them automatically. This is not forced. It happens gradually as trust develops. The mind learns that nothing needs to be done for a thought to pass. Sitting becomes less about discipline and more about allowing. Buddhist texts often describe this stage indirectly. They speak of abiding, remaining with what is present, allowing sensations, sounds, and thoughts to arise and fade without preference. This is not passive drifting. Awareness remains clear. It simply does not interfere. In this space, something subtle occurs. The urgency behind thinking diminishes. Thoughts still arise, but they do not carry the same demand. The mind begins to experience thought as movement rather than instruction. This experience is difficult to describe precisely because it is not an achievement. Nothing is attained. Something loosens. Many people notice that when they stop trying to solve the mind, the body responds first. Breathing deepens. Muscles release. The nervous system shifts quietly. This bodily settling supports mental settling. Thought slows without being asked to slow. Gaps appear naturally between thoughts. These gaps are not empty in a troubling way. They feel spacious. In Buddhist teaching, These gaps were not treated as special states. They were treated as evidence. Evidence that the mind does not need constant management, that stillness emerges when interference ends. This is why Buddhist practice avoids chasing silence. Silence arrives on its own terms. When sought directly, it retreats. Sitting without solving teaches the mind a new relationship with itself. Problems do not disappear. They lose urgency. They no longer dominate awareness. Overthinking weakens here because its foundation erodes. The belief that something must be resolved right now fades. The mind becomes comfortable with openness. This comfort does not come from reassurance. It comes from experience. The experience of sitting with thought and discovering that nothing collapses when it is left alone. From this ground, the next shift becomes possible. When the mind no longer needs to solve itself, daily life begins to feel different. Thought still appears, but it no longer controls the rhythm of experience. That shift extends beyond sitting. We will move into daily life next. Overthinking does not stay on the cushion. It follows people into conversations, into work, into moments that appear simple on the surface. Even when the body is moving, the mind may remain caught in rehearsal. Buddhist teachers noticed this early. Sitting revealed the pattern, but life confirmed it. The same mental habits appeared while walking, speaking, eating, and listening. Stillness made them visible. Activity tested whether understanding had settled. In daily life, overthinking often hides behind usefulness. Planning sounds responsible. Reviewing sounds careful. Anticipation sounds intelligent. Yet beneath these forms, the same tension appears. The mind leans forward. It prepares excessively. It revisits what has already passed. A conversation ends, and the mind continues speaking. A task is completed, and the mind rechecks it. A decision is made, and the mind returns to it repeatedly. The body moves on. Thought stays behind. Buddhism did not treat this as failure. It treated it as habit. Habits persist when they are unquestioned. They weaken when they are seen clearly. The same observation used in sitting can appear here. A thought arises during activity. Attention notices it without following. The action continues. Thought completes itself without being fed. This shift is subtle. It does not require stopping what you are doing. It does not require mental commentary. It is a slight change in relationship. Thought is present, but it does not take the lead. When this happens, something surprising is often noticed. Life becomes smoother. Actions feel less divided. Energy that was previously trapped in mental rehearsal becomes available for what is actually happening. This is not because thought disappears. It is because attention stops splitting itself between the present moment and imagined alternatives. Buddhist texts often emphasize ordinary activities for this reason. Walking, washing, eating. These moments reveal how easily the mind drifts and how gently it can return without force. Overthinking loses its dominance here. It becomes one movement among many rather than the center of experience. Thought no longer dictates pace. Life sets the rhythm. This integration matters. Calm that exists only in stillness remains fragile. Calm that moves with activity becomes stable. As this understanding deepens, another area of daily life reveals itself as especially sensitive to overthinking. Relationships. Thought plays a powerful role there, shaping interpretation and emotion long after events have passed. We will stay with that next. Relationships offer fertile ground for overthinking because they touch identity directly. Words spoken by others do not arrive as neutral sounds. They are interpreted, weighed, and replayed. Tone is examined. Meaning is inferred. Silence is filled in. Buddhist observation did not separate this from other forms of mental activity. It saw the same pattern at work, only intensified. When something matters, thought moves faster and returns more often. A brief exchange can echo for hours. A look can be replayed repeatedly. The mind reconstructs conversations, adjusting phrases, imagining alternative outcomes. Each replay feels like preparation, even though the moment has passed. What keeps this process alive is attachment to interpretation. The mind wants certainty about how it was seen, what was meant, what might happen next. Thought becomes an attempt to secure emotional ground. Buddhist practice approaches this gently. It does not suggest withdrawing from connection. It suggests noticing how quickly the mind leaves the present interaction and enters speculation. When attention returns to what is actually occurring, the imagined layers soften. A conversation that has ended no longer needs to be completed mentally. The next interaction does not require rehearsal. This does not mean ignoring feeling. Feeling remains. It is simply allowed to move without being wrapped in narrative. Sensation is felt. Emotion is noticed. Thought is seen as one response among others. Many Buddhist teachers emphasized listening for this reason. Listening anchors attention in what is happening now. It limits projection. It reduces the space where overthinking thrives. When listening replaces rehearsal, relationships feel lighter. Misunderstandings are addressed as they arise, rather than multiplied internally. Silence becomes less threatening. Overthinking in relationships weakens when interpretation is held loosely. Meaning does not need to be secured immediately. Understanding unfolds through presence rather than analysis. This shift requires patience. Old habits return easily. Each return becomes an opportunity to notice without judgment. The work remains the same, observation without interference. As this way of relating settles, another familiar setting reveals its own version of overthinking: work, responsibility, and performance. There, thought often wears the mask of productivity. We will move there next. In work and responsibility, overthinking often disguises itself as diligence. Planning feels necessary. Reviewing feels prudent. Anticipating problems feels professional. Because these activities resemble care, the tension beneath them is easy to miss. Buddhist observation did not reject responsibility. It questioned excess mental strain. The issue was not preparation, it was attachment to imagined outcomes. At work, the mind often moves ahead of the body. A task is underway, yet attention is already evaluating what comes next. Possible mistakes are anticipated. Reactions from others are imagined. The present action becomes secondary to the future scenario. This forward pull creates pressure. The body remains in one place while the mind runs ahead repeatedly. Energy fragments. Fatigue accumulates even when little has gone wrong. Buddhist teachers noticed that this pattern rarely improves performance. Attention divided between now and later loses precision. Actions become rushed. Enjoyment disappears. The mind stays busy without becoming clearer. The practice here remains the same. Thought is noticed without being fed. Planning happens when required. When it finishes, attention returns to what is being done. This does not remove care, it refines it. Work done with full presence tends to be simpler and more accurate. Errors are noticed earlier. Effort feels contained rather than scattered. Buddhist texts often emphasize right effort. Effort applied where it belongs, not everywhere at once. Overthinking spreads effort thinly. Observation gathers it again. When responsibility is met this way, anxiety softens. The mind no longer rehearses endlessly. Trust develops slowly. Trust in attention, trust in response. This trust changes how pressure is experienced. Urgency loses intensity. Tasks are completed one by one. The day unfolds with fewer mental echoes. As overthinking loosens its hold here, the mind finds another familiar arena, the quietest one, the one with the fewest interruptions. Night. When the day ends and external demands fall away, thought often returns with renewed force. This is where overthinking feels most difficult to escape. We will stay with that next. When night arrives, the mind often behaves differently. The body settles. The environment grows still. Responsibilities pause. And yet, this is when overthinking can feel most insistent. Without movement or sound, thought becomes more noticeable. There is nothing to compete with it, no task to absorb attention, no conversation to anchor awareness. The mind fills the space it has been given. Buddhist teachers paid close attention to this moment. They noticed that night does not create overthinking. It reveals it. During the day, activity masks mental habit. At night, habit stands alone. Thoughts that were held back by obligation now move freely. Unfinished conversations return. Imagined futures appear more vivid. The mind attempts to use the quiet to complete what it could not resolve earlier. This can feel frustrating. The body wants rest. The mind insists on movement. The harder one tries to sleep, the more alert the mind becomes. Buddhist practice responds by removing the struggle. Night is not treated as a problem to solve. Thought is not treated as an obstacle to rest. Both are allowed to coexist. When attention stops trying to push thought away, something subtle shifts. The mind no longer needs to stay sharp. The sense of duty fades. Thought may continue for a time, but its edge softens. Many practitioners notice that sleep arrives not when the mind becomes silent, but when the mind loses interest in its own activity. Thoughts become less compelling. Their stories lose urgency. Attention drifts naturally. This is why Buddhist approaches to nighttime rest emphasize allowing rather than controlling. The body knows how to sleep. The mind follows when it is no longer driven. There is no instruction here to empty the mind. There is only an invitation to stop demanding quiet. Quiet appears on its own. As this understanding settles, night becomes less adversarial. Thought may still appear. It no longer dominates the experience. Rest becomes possible without effort. This marks an important transition. Overthinking weakens not through resistance, but through familiarity. The mind learns that nothing is lost by letting go. From here, the exploration turns toward integration. What happens when this relationship with thought becomes stable? When overthinking no longer defines the rhythm of experience? We will stay with that next. As observation becomes familiar, a quiet shift takes place. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer carry the same weight. They are noticed without urgency. Their presence no longer demands response. This is not something that happens suddenly. It develops through repeated seeing. Each time a thought is allowed to pass without engagement, its authority weakens slightly. Over time, the mind learns a new pattern. Buddhist teachers described this change carefully. They did not speak of controlling thought. They spoke of disidentifying from it. The mind stops treating thoughts as instructions and begins to treat them as movements. When authority fades, overthinking loses its grip. The loop no longer sustains itself. Without attention to fuel it, repetition becomes less frequent. The mind rests more easily between thoughts. This rest is not blankness. Awareness remains. Sounds are heard. Sensations are felt. The body remains present. What changes is the role thought plays. It moves to the background. This shift brings relief that feels different from resolution. There is no sense of having solved anything. There is simply less pressure. The mind no longer insists on closure. Open-endedness feels tolerable. Many practitioners notice that emotions soften here as well. Anxiety loses its sharp edge. Concern remains, but it does not spiral. Feelings are felt without being multiplied by narrative. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize patience. The mind cannot be convinced to let go. It must discover for itself that letting go is safe. As this discovery settles, attention becomes more stable. Presence feels less effortful. Life unfolds with fewer mental echoes. At this stage, overthinking no longer defines experience. It may appear occasionally, especially under stress, but it does not dominate. The mind returns more quickly to openness. This change does not require constant vigilance. It sustains itself through familiarity. The mind recognizes a quieter way of being and returns to it naturally. From here, the final understanding becomes possible. Overthinking was never something to defeat. It was something to understand. This understanding leads gently to the solution phrase that has been present all along, waiting to be fully seen. We will bring this together next. At a certain point, the phrase, "stop overthinking," begins to change its meaning. At first, it sounds like a command, something to do, an instruction that adds pressure. Many people hear it this way and feel resistance immediately. The mind does not stop on demand. Buddhist understanding approaches the phrase differently. Stopping overthinking does not happen through effort. It happens through recognition. When thought is seen clearly, its urgency fades. The loop weakens on its own. Nothing needs to be forced. This is why Buddhist teachers rarely told people to quiet the mind. They invited people to see the mind. Seeing accomplished what effort could not. Overthinking relied on misunderstanding. The belief that thought was necessary for safety. The belief that resolution lay just ahead. When these beliefs dissolved through observation, thought lost momentum. Stopping happened as a consequence, not a goal. This is an important distinction. Overthinking ends when the mind no longer believes it must continue. That belief does not disappear through argument. It disappears through experience. Each time a thought is noticed without engagement, the mind learns something. Each time a thought dissolves on its own, confidence grows. The mind realizes it does not need to manage itself constantly. Stopping overthinking feels gentle. There is no sudden silence. There is a gradual easing. Space appears between thoughts. Attention settles more often on what is present. The phrase, "stop overthinking," becomes descriptive rather than directive. It names what is happening naturally when understanding deepens. Nothing has been removed. Nothing has been suppressed. Something has been released. From here, the final movement of this exploration unfolds. What remains when overthinking no longer dominates the mind? What fills the space that thought once occupied? We will stay with that next. When overthinking loosens its hold, the mind does not become empty. Something else becomes more noticeable instead. Sensation, sound, and presence step forward quietly, as if they had been waiting for space. This can feel unfamiliar at first. Many people expect silence to follow the end of mental strain. Instead, they find a gentler awareness. The room feels clearer. Breathing becomes more apparent. Small details register without effort. Buddhist teachings describe this as returning to what is already here. Attention no longer hovers above experience. It settles into it. The body becomes a point of reference. The senses anchor awareness naturally. This shift brings a different kind of rest. Not the rest of unconsciousness, but the rest of no longer needing to manage experience. The mind stops monitoring itself. It stops checking whether it is calm enough. Thought still appears from time to time. It does not disappear permanently. When it arises, it is met with familiarity rather than urgency. It passes without ceremony. Many practitioners notice that this state feels quietly alive. Colors appear brighter. Sounds feel closer. Ordinary moments carry more texture. This is not because anything has improved externally. Attention has returned to where life is actually happening. This presence does not require effort to maintain. It sustains itself when interference remains low. The mind knows how to rest when it is not being pushed. As overthinking recedes, time feels different. Moments stretch without feeling heavy. The rush to move forward eases. Experience unfolds at its own pace. Buddhist teachers often pointed to this quality without naming it directly. They spoke of ease, of naturalness, of being at home in the moment. These were not states to achieve. They were conditions that emerged when unnecessary struggle ended. What remains is not something new. It is something familiar that had been overshadowed. From this place, life continues much as before. Responsibilities remain. Relationships continue. Challenges appear. The difference lies in how they are met. In the final part of this exploration, we will bring this understanding into a single, quiet image, one that holds the entire process without explanation. Buddhist teachers often avoided explaining the mind directly. Instead, they pointed to images that could be felt rather than understood. One of the most enduring is that of a lake. When the water is disturbed, the surface ripples. Wind passes over it. Objects fall in. The lake does not resist these movements. It does not attempt to correct them. It allows them to arise and settle in their own time. When the water is still, the surface reflects clearly. The sky appears. Trees appear. Even clouds pass through the reflection without altering the lake itself. The clarity does not come from effort, it comes from rest. Overthinking is like constant stirring. The mind believes movement is required to maintain clarity, yet clarity appears when stirring ends. This image resonated deeply in Buddhist teaching because it required no instruction. The lake does not try to be calm. It becomes calm when interference ceases. Thoughts in this image are movements on the surface. They are not enemies. They are not mistakes. They are temporary disturbances caused by conditions. When conditions change, the surface settles. The important insight here is trust. Trust that the mind knows how to clear itself. Trust that clarity does not need to be produced. It emerges when it is not obstructed. Many people discover this accidentally. A moment of stillness arrives unexpectedly. Thought quiets briefly. Relief follows. Then the mind rushes back in, trying to recreate the moment. The stirring resumes. Buddhist teaching gently points out that clarity cannot be chased. It arrives when chasing stops. The lake does not check whether it is clear enough. It does not worry about future ripples. It remains open to whatever appears, knowing that movement will pass. When this image is held lightly, overthinking loses its seriousness. Thought becomes weather rather than command. Movement no longer implies danger. Stillness no longer feels fragile. This understanding does not demand practice in a strict sense. It invites remembering. Each time the mind stirs, the image returns. Nothing needs to be done. The stirring will settle on its own. With this image in place, the exploration draws toward completion. There is no final instruction to give, only a way of seeing that can be returned to gently, again and again. One final movement remains, not to add anything new, but to allow the whole understanding to rest. At this point, nothing new needs to be introduced. The work has already been done quietly, through seeing rather than instruction. What remains is allowing that understanding to settle without interference. Understanding in Buddhist teaching does not arrive as a conclusion. It arrives as a shift in relationship. Thought has not been eliminated. It has been repositioned. It no longer occupies the center by default. When this shift settles, the mind feels less compelled to explain itself. There is less commentary layered over experience. Silence no longer feels like absence. It feels like space. This space is not empty. It holds sound, sensation, and awareness without strain. The mind rests inside experience instead of hovering above it. Many practitioners notice that this resting carries a sense of ease that does not depend on circumstances. The room can be quiet or noisy. The day can be complete or unresolved. Rest remains available because it is no longer conditional. In this state, overthinking no longer needs to be addressed directly. When it appears, it is recognized quickly. Recognition is enough. The loop does not have time to build momentum. There is also less interest in fixing the mind. The mind is no longer treated as a project. Attention turns outward naturally, toward what is present. This is why Buddhist teachers often ended their guidance without instruction. They trusted the mind's capacity to integrate what it had seen. Forcing closure would only reintroduce effort. Letting understanding settle means allowing moments of quiet to appear without claiming them. It means allowing thought to arise without following it. It means allowing experience to unfold without supervision. Nothing is being held in place. Nothing is being pushed away. From here, daily life continues. The difference is subtle. Overthinking no longer sets the tone. Presence does. Two final movements remain. One to acknowledge how this understanding lives over time, and one to bring the exploration to rest without explanation. When overthinking loosens, the change does not announce itself loudly. Life does not reorganize overnight. Habits return. Old patterns reappear, especially during stress or uncertainty. What changes is not the absence of these moments, but how long they last. The mind notices more quickly when it has begun to loop. That noticing carries no frustration. It feels familiar, almost neutral. The loop slows. Attention returns without effort. Over time, this familiarity reshapes trust. Trust grows that nothing is lost by not engaging every thought. Decisions still get made. Problems still get addressed. The mind discovers that clarity arises from presence, not rehearsal. This trust reduces background tension. Even when thinking resumes, it feels lighter. Thoughts pass through without collecting the same emotional residue. The mind recovers faster. Many people describe this as a sense of inner space, not distance from life, but room within it. Room to respond rather than react. Room to pause without falling behind. This spaciousness changes how difficulty is experienced. Challenges still register. Emotions still move. What fades is the feeling of being trapped inside the mind. Thought no longer surrounds experience completely. It occupies a smaller portion of awareness. This does not require vigilance. The mind does not need constant monitoring. Familiarity does the work. Having seen that thoughts resolve themselves, the mind stops insisting on intervention. Even setbacks take on a different tone. A night of overthinking no longer feels like failure. It feels like weather passing through. The next day begins without residue. This is how the change endures. Not through perfection, but through gentleness. The mind learns it can return without punishment. That return becomes easier each time. As this understanding lives on, something simple becomes clear. Overthinking was never the enemy. It was a misunderstanding that persisted until it was seen. With that seeing complete, there is nothing left to manage. Only one final movement remains, not to conclude, but to allow the mind to rest where it already is. There is nothing left to resolve. The mind does not need a final insight to hold on to. It does not need a summary to remember. What mattered has already been seen through experience, not explanation. Overthinking quiets in the same way it always could have. Not because it was defeated, but because it was understood. Thought may still appear. A memory may surface. A question may form. None of this disrupts what is present. The mind no longer rushes toward these movements. It allows them to pass. As it is learned, they will. Rest arrives here without effort. Not the rest of sleep alone, but the rest of no longer needing to manage the mind. The rest of knowing that nothing essential is being missed. Breathing continues on its own. Sound comes and goes. Awareness remains open. There is no instruction to follow from this point. No practice to remember. No state to maintain. What remains is a simple familiarity with how experience unfolds when it is left alone. Overthinking fades when it is no longer believed. If the mind drifts, it drifts. If thought returns, it returns. If quiet appears, it appears. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be taken away. The understanding rests where it belongs, beneath words, beneath effort, beneath explanation. And from here, the mind is free to settle in its own time.